Well, good evening to everybody, or as you filter in, good evening to everyone that's filtering in, and good evening to anyone, or good day or evening to anyone listening to us in the future. We welcome you once again to our bi weekly presentation of our webinars presented by the Travis Association for the Blind's Training and Employment Services Department. Again, I am Eric Cifuentes, joined by the Adaptive Tech Supervisor, Aaron Hoffman, tonight. Hello, Aaron.
Hello.
And tonight we are going to be kicking off a sequel series, if you will, to the last three presentations that we've been holding the last 6 weeks, and that would be the Office Word series. And as promised, we are cycling over to a new Office application or a different Office application. And this will be a three-part series as well. And it will cover the Office Excel application. And a lot of people will when people come into class, they tend to fear Excel the most because when you look at Excel and when you explore Excel, it seems a little daunting. It's just this massive expanse of emptiness and blocks, almost like a board game looking application. As where when you look at Word, it's an empty document, and you know when you type, it's going to enter text. Or when you use Outlook, you know what an emailing client is. Most people email, most people know what a calendar is. So Excel, it's very through the lens of someone who uses it daily, it's very easy to understand what it's for. But as someone who wants to come in and doesn't understand what Excel is, or someone who does know what Excel is, but doesn't necessarily know how to go about using it as a totally blind or as a very visually impaired person, and that could seem very challenging. How do you keep track of where you are on the grid? How do you know how to model data? And that's actually very simple because, once again, JAWS gives you the ability to do all of that non-visually and completely accessibly. And we're going to cover that today. But before I do, I just want to cover the preliminaries. If you wish to join us in tonight's conversation, Alt plus Y will raise your hand on your Windows and Command plus Y on your Mac. On your telephone, that is *9 if you join us via phone. If you wish to just post a question into the chat discussion box, Alt plus H will put you into the chat box, and Command plus H will likewise do so in your Macs. We encourage all conversation. We encourage all verbal and written conversation. Once again, if you actually, and I'll make sure to post this at the end of the presentation, but if you do wish to take classes with us beyond what we're showing you here in these presentations, because what we do show you here is technically very beginner level content, and we do go very, very into the weeds with our classes uh, upon request, of course. You can call us. Mark this number down. It's 512-647-4625, and that will connect you directly to myself or Aaron, and we will talk to you and schedule you for an assessment. If you wish to come into class, we will evaluate where you are knowledge-wise on whatever given application you harbor interest in, and then we will schedule you for classes. Classes are twice a week for an hour each. Most classes are structured in the way where you'll complete it in a month or 8 classes, and that's for one level. So, for example, our Excel course is split into 3 levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Like so, there would be 24 classes across all 3 months of the Excel curriculum. So, I apologize for getting into the weeds, but there it is. That's sort of, how we handle teaching Excel or teaching any application or any concept in general. As we break it up into these classes, and each class we approach with a certain number of bullet points that we want to cover with each student. So obviously, each student moves at their own pace, and we are very accommodating with that. So, without further ado, let's get into Excel because I personally enjoy working with Excel. And what Excel is, it's an incredibly powerful data entry piece of software. It allows you to keep track of so much data from entering basic employer rosters. Let's say you're the head of a department or you're in HR and you just want to capture the names, wages, hours, and phone numbers of your employees. You can plug this all into Excel and you can model it in a certain way. You can model it, and we'll talk a little bit more about modeling later on. You can model it with each employee being its own row, with each column being a piece of information tied to that employee. And again, we'll talk about that just very, very briefly later on. Or you can enter things like sales reports, how much of something you sold, how much of a certain product you sold. And then you can break it down even more on a spreadsheet with other figures. For example, how much of a product did I sell in January or March or February? Now, how much of this product did I sell in quarter one, which is a summation of January, February, and March? And then you could say, well, how much did I sell the entire year? And then now you're adding the 4 quarters. So you could really break it down and itemize so much data. It really is up to user discretion. And I think to just go further into what we use Excel for here at the office and what you can use Excel for from the home to the office, Aaron is sort of our Excel guru, so I'll let him take it away and just give you guys a strong overview of what Excel can be used for. So take it away, Aaron.
Thank you, Eric. As Eric pointed out, you can use Excel for many different functions. It doesn't just have to be for entering numbers in a database, all numbers or all tables. There are many different uses you can have for Excel besides our general idea of budgeting and accounting. Of course, you can use Excel for keeping the books, keeping your numbers, and having calculations. But you can also use it at home for not just corporate, but you can use it for personal budgeting. For example, you can use a budget for a month or a year, and you can even make calculators. One of the biggest features of Excel are its functions and its ability to talk to other cells. If you needed to take 5 numbers in 5 different rows, you could add them A1 plus A2 plus A3 plus A4 plus A5, and we'll get to what those mean later. Or what Excel allows you to do is to use functions and auto sums and all of these different mathematical or engineering or financial calculations. And you can perform these on cells and a group of cells or a whole table all at once, and it'll add it automatically for you. And if you have a function or a cell, for example, that you need to change, you could have one cell being reliant on another cell. So for example, if you have a tax rate of about 4%, and then you type in something for what is the total of that, you could have a third cell that would tell you, here's the amount of tax you would pay on it, which means it would be using 3 cells talking to each other. One cell would be just for taxes, one cell would be for your payment amount, and the third cell would combine those two. It would do some math with them, and it would give you the numbers. And you could change one of those numbers, and you wouldn't have to change the others because they would automatically update. For our example, if you had 5% tax instead of 4% tax, and you typed it in, you could use a formula on one cell that would automatically calculate it and update it for you. Budgeting is very powerful in Excel because you can type in one place and use references, which are like bookmarks, to say, hey, I want you to use something in this data, and I want you to bring it over here, or I want to reference it in some way. For example, you could say, what was my total income for last month? You might have that typed somewhere, but instead of going and manually typing it, you could tell Excel, hey, I would like to reference that. So if I change that again, then it'll be updated automatically. And that's very powerful if you're doing things like yearly budgets, because you can take one, let's say, static cost like rent. You could say, I want that times 12, and then boom, it'll give you your, rent for the whole year. Besides budgeting, there's another interesting part of data entry, and that's using Excel as an inventory. You can have things like stock management systems where you would have item numbers for a store, let's say, and then prices, and then cost in stock, number of cases or unit uh, prices. And that would be great for using stock management. You can use things like sorting and filtering for Excel, and that would help you to weed things out. Or you can use things like conditional formatting to let you know, I want to see all the stock that's below 10% or such. And it would do it if you had 1,000 items, it could do it very quickly for you. And this is in Excel. As Eric mentioned earlier, if you were an HR employee and you needed to make a roster, you could use Excel as a mini database and use each of those columns in your small database for first name, last name, employee number, and such. And then you could use that and bring it into Microsoft Word for a very advanced feature called a mail merge, which is very nice if you're doing bulk emails or bulk print mailing, if people still do print mail. And last but not least, of course, Dungeons and Dragons or any other dice-based games. You can use Excel as a fun game table. You can use it, for example, to pull random lists if you're making encounter tables for Dungeons and Dragons, or you can use it to make your own game. For example, if you know a little bit of programming, you can actually make maps for a fantasy game, or you could make descriptions or any other sort of uh, anything that's dependent on random variables. There are several things you can do with Excel just besides crunching the numbers here and there, and here.
That is very true too. Uh, you can also use Excel for some very cool things. For example, you could pull data, uh, and again, this is beyond the scope of these presentations, but you could pull data from external sources, say uh, that you had, let's say that you had a table of information of numbers. Let's say you're an investor and you wanted to pull stock numbers from a website. For example, Vanguard, which is a very popular brokerage firm. You wanted to pull those numbers for a certain stock, you could do that with something called a Power Query. And as long as the data has already been modeled for you in a table, which Vanguard has done so already, you can use this Power Query to pull that data. And you can do that. You can take data from multiple different sources and view it all in one place. And again, that's beyond this presentation, but it just shows to you. It just it show again. It goes to show just how incredibly powerful you can use Excel, or how incredibly powerful Excel can be to carry out so many different things. So let's open up Excel and actually give a look to what we have. So let's open Excel just like Word. We'll navigate over to the Start menu, press, we'll slow this down a tad. We'll enter Excel into the global search box. And obviously, because I use it so much, Excel appears almost automatically. Oh, we'll press enter to launch it. And just like when you open Microsoft Word, you are placed into the backstage view upon opening Excel. And just like Word, you have your Microsoft provided templates. By default, the blank template, or in this case, the blank workbook, is going to be the default choice. Let's navigate through here and see what Microsoft gives you to work with.
Monthly budget alert from tested new monthly budget accessibility guide.
Monthly budget accessibility guide. So this would be an accessible budget that you can use.
Household monthly budget.
Household monthly budget.
Welcome to Excel.
And then there's a welcome to Excel, and that's like a little tutorial.
Drop-down tutorial.
Drop-down tutorial. So there's a few templates, and there's also a few tutorials that you can navigate through. But obviously, Microsoft understands through, I guess, through crowdsourcing and through just data gathering that a lot of people predominantly use Excel for budgeting, which is absolutely understandable. I mean, Excel with those mathematical operations is so powerful. You can create such a very nice budget. And we'll be looking at one of those budgets here in a few weeks that I built myself, and we'll be filling it in. So let's navigate over with tab to see what else you have in the backstage view.
More templates link. Alt
So
followed by F.
again, you have
AYE.
more templates right here. If I press enter, I can search through the thousands of templates that Microsoft offers. Just like in Word, Excel has a lot of templates you can use. Rosters, company rosters, you have different sorts of budgets. You have different sorts of lists, inventory lists, you have clerk lists, Z-tapes if you're a cashier and you wanted to use a template for something like a Z-tape. So there's a ton of different things that you can use in Excel or in Excel, yes, in Excel to model data that Microsoft builds by default. You don't need to build a data model yourself.
Search edit.
You can search for files,
Open recent tab. Alt followed.
and over here you have the most recently used files that you've ran on Excel, just like on Word. So with Word and Excel, and this extends to PowerPoint, Office Outlook is a little different, but with these three applications, the backstage view is very similar. Templates, search box, and a most recently used or opened list. So I'm going to go to hit escape to default back to the blank workbook template.
Escape. Book 1 dash Excel sheet 1 lang A1.
All right, so we heard there are quite a few different things. So let's break it down. We heard book 1, sheet 1, blank A1. So let's start from the beginning. Book 1. Just when you open a document on Word, document 1, book 1 is the default name of the first opened blank document or blank workbook of an Excel session. So if I were to open Excel again, this would be called book 2. And what a book is a workbook, and that is the biggest unit of data in Excel, a workbook. And we're going to break down the data measurements here in a little bit. The next thing we heard is sheet 1, and that's the next biggest unit of measurement in a workbook. And a sheet is a conglomeration of data, but that's one sheet. A workbook is what it says. A workbook can have multiple.
Windows up there.
A workbook can have multiple sheets. For example, I can have the first sheet, which is a sheet of instructions or a sheet that explains what this workbook's about. Then the second sheet, for example, will contain a budget outlining my gross pay, how much money I make every week. And then the next sheet is going to have something like, what are my taxes to find my net pay? And then the next sheet could have something like, all right, now that I have my net pay, let's start deducting expenses. And finally, my final sheet can put all of those things together and give me one place where I can itemize all those things in one screen. But that gives you an understanding. Sheets can be used to present data or multiple sets of data differently or different parts of a big scale of data. For example, those employee rosters, one sheet can just have the names and the employee numbers. That can be your general, the sheet that you just want to share around. Let's say you want to share what the list of your employees are. But then the next worksheet is going to reference that first sheet with those functions that we discussed, those formulas. And let's say that second sheet references the first sheet just containing the employee names, the phone numbers. But now we're using this second sheet to present more sensitive data like pay rates or pay hours or social security numbers. This sheet you're not going to share to anyone that just asks for a list of employees because it's more sensitive. But because you used functions to reference cells in other sheets, which are called cell references, now you can put these you can reference those employee names on that first sheet without having to re-enter all of that data. So now you've saved a lot of time. And we'll do that here again in the following presentation. And finally, the last thing you heard was blank A1. Blank just means that there is nothing in this cell, and A1 means that you're on cell A1. And once again, a cell is the smallest unit of data in a workbook. So here we are. Again, insert tab to repeat this.
Sheet 1, blank A1.
Sheet 1, blank A1. We are at cell A1. A cell is one unit of data in a workbook. It's a tiny little block of data in an otherwise massive expanse of data. And that sounds very daunting, so I apologize. That's probably not the best phraseology to use. So let's break it down. A1, what does that mean? In Excel, you can think of Excel as a big game board or a big checkers board, with each square being its own uh, its own its own block. Each square has its own name: A1, B1, A2, B2. But what exactly do these names mean? These are called cell addresses, and just like a street address or a address book, you can navigate by addresses. So what A1 means, for example, is that you're at the first column and you're also on the topmost row. So columns in Excel are identified by letters. As you go across left and right, you're moving from column to column. So when you say you're moving across a row, you're moving from column to column because a row of cells contains various different cells that are part of a different column because you're moving left to right. So when you move from the A1, one cell over to the right, I'm going to predict is B1. So let's see.
Blank B1.
There you go, B1. And if I move over again, it's going to be C1
Blank C1.
and D1
Blank D1. Blank E1. Blank F1.
into perpetuity. Now let's see what happens when you go into Z1. You might be thinking that there's only 26 cells across because there can't be a letter after Z, right? We're not using any other sort of alphabet. Let's see what we have. So let's move over to Z1, which will be the 26th column to the right, if you're following along.
Blank blank J1.
J1,
Blank K1. Blank L1. Blank M1. Blank N1. Blank O1. Blank P1. Blank Q1. Blank R1. Blank S1. Blank T1. Blank Q1. Blank V1. Blank W1. Blank X1. Blank Y1. Blank Z1.
here it is, Z1. So if I were to press right arrow again, you might think that there is nothing after here. You cannot move any further as there are no more letters. How could there be more columns if there are no more letters in the alphabet? Let's see what's going to happen if we hit the right arrow once more.
Blank AA1.
AA1. So if you finish, if you run through the alphabet, you'll just start right back at the beginning. So Excel is going to just rename the columns. Now it's going to use AA, AB, AC,
Blank AB1. Blank AC1. Blank AD1.
AD1. And once you get to AZ1, guess what it's going to be? BA1, BB1. So it's going to do this for quite a while. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control right arrow, which will move me to the end of the row. Let's see how far we go.
Blank XFD1. Start of new data region.
XFD1. That means that we've gone through the alphabet several times. And to my knowledge, I believe it's something like 16,000 cells across. Each row consists of over 16,000 cells, which means that there are over 16,000 columns in one worksheet. This is one worksheet, folks, which means that worksheet 2 and worksheet 3 are going to have just as many columns, 16,000 columns across. Now I'm going to hit Control left arrow to navigate 16,000 columns to the left back to A1.
Blank A1. Start of new
A1.
data region.
Now, if we want to move downwards, we're going to be moving down. If we hit the down arrow, we will be moving down a column. So when we move right, we move across a row, but from column to column. When we move down, we're moving down a column, but we're jumping row to row. Because once again, cells in a column are on different rows, and cells on a row are on different columns. So get used to get used to chanting that mantra. It helps a lot to understand where exactly you are on a workbook. Letters signify columns. Numbers signify rows. So if I go down from A1, I should be in A2.
Land A2.
Likewise, if I go down once more, I should be in A3.
Land A3.
Now, just as control right arrow took me to the end of the row, control down arrow should take me to the end of the column. Let's see how many cells are in one column. And by default, this will mean that there are these many cells or these many rows in one worksheet.
Land A1,048,576. Start of new date.
Kind of an arbitrary number, but a very massive arbitrary number. 1,500 something thousand 48. So I'm not a mathematician. I'm an accountant. So, but I can still guess with absolutely no degree of uncertainty that there are a lot of cells, millions of cells actually, in one worksheet. 1 million times 16,000. Actually, there are billions of cells in one worksheet. So there, is that actually 1 million times? See, now I'm judging. I'm second guessing myself. There are so many cells, and each cell can contain so much data. It really is up to user discretion. You could have essentially 1 million employees in your company, and you can log them all in one cell. If you said, I'm going to give each employee one row down column A. Column A is going to have my employee's first name, and column B is going to have my employee's last name. You could have 1,500,000 employees. So you could essentially be Walmart and have just about enough room in one worksheet to categorize or to list your entire workforce. So whenever you look at an Excel spreadsheet, you can never you can never complain of not having enough space to enter your data. And again, that's only one worksheet. You can have, I don't even know if there's a limit of worksheets that you can have in one workbook. I've worked with a workbook that has well over 30 worksheets, but I'm sure out there's a workbook with well over 100, 1,000. I mean, you can make workbooks as massive as you want, and each worksheet does not need to be the same as the previous one. They're all going to be different because they're all going to follow a certain model and they're all going to be built. So when you build a workbook, it's not like when you open a document and you just start writing gun ho. You actually have to sit down and ask yourself.
There are over 17 billion cells in every worksheet. Wow.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. So you'll have to actually sit down and mark or think about how you want to model your data. Excel is going to make you have to sit down and think, how do I want to present the data? Do I want each employee to be its own column or its own row? How much space do I want between employee? How many columns will I need? Let's see, I want to capture the employee's first name, last name, their social security number, their birth date, where they live. There's a lot of information that I'm trying to capture. So you'll have to ask yourself, how many rows do I need? How many columns do I need? How do I want to model this? Where do I want to put things? Do I want first name first to the first name to the left, then followed by the last name, then followed by what piece of information? So it's going to have to be a little bit of trial and error, a little bit of actual planning before you go ahead and enter data, because otherwise you can edit your entry. But why do unnecessary work when you can just simply open a workbook and start entering data based on a predefined set of parameters, right? Where you say, all right, first column is going to have the employee's first name. Second column will have the employee's last name. Third column will have their birth date or date of hire. Fourth column will have their hours per week. Fifth column will have their email address. That's kind of a weird model I just built, but I'm going off the cuff. You would actually sit down and have to say, what goes where, what's more important, what should I have, what, where. And similarly with your sales reports, how do you want to present your data, your figures? Where are your figures going to be presented vertically or horizontally? Which means, is each row going to be its own soft drink or product? For example, to the far left, you're going to have your Cokes, your Pepsis, your Sprites going down, uh, and the next row is going to be January. I mean, the next column will be January. The next column will be March. So it's going to be, or are you going to do it the other way where you transpose it and you're going to have across one row, you'll have your soda. And then below that, you'll have each row or down the column, so you'll have the months where each row is a month. So that's a little crazy the way I just explained it. So once again, you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to sit down and actually model what you want your workbook to
Alerts
look
from
like.
test to everyone, planning out your data's format before you enter.
Yes, thank you. And you said it much more eloquently than myself. But yes, for example,
Land.
most times the most common way of modeling your data, and I'm going to go ahead and model a tiny little bit of data for you guys, is like this, like so. Across the top row, usually we have the title of a worksheet. So I'm going to go to cell A1 and I'm going to enter employee roster. Now I'm going to press Control Enter to save it.
Control Enter. Employee roster overlaps right near B1. A1. Employee roster overlaps right near B1. A1.
So we'll talk about that next presentation. So JAWS is telling me that this is overlapping B1, which
Land B1.
is one to the right.
Employee.
So by default, you really aren't supposed to enter pages of information into one cell, but you can adjust how much information can fit in one cell using formatting and line spacing. And we'll look at that a little later in a future presentation. So on the top line, the top row on A1, we have the title of this worksheet, which is
Sheet 1. Employee roster overlaps right near
employee roster here at cell
A1.
A1. And with insert C, you can read the cell address. Of course, the cell address is the intersection of row and column. I am at cell address
A1.
A1. Now, let's down arrow.
Land A2.
And here, I'm going to leave the second row blank because this is going to establish what's called a data region. Let's not fret too much on that right now. So I'm going to go down one more row.
Land A3.
And here is where my model begins, or here's where my data entry begins. Across the top row, I'm going to set my what are called column headers. And this is going to specify what goes in each row. So for example, here on the far left, in column A,
A3.
row 3, I'm going to put in first name.
Land B3.
And now I right arrowed one to the right. And here I'm going to put last name. Arrow once more to the right.
Land C3.
And I'm going to put date of hire. Okay. Or no, let's hit escape. We're going to cancel that out. And we're going to put hire dates. Okay. And now I went one to the right. And here I could put in something else like social security number. But for this sakes, we're going to go with a very small data set. So this will be 3 columns across, one row. And the topmost row of this data set is row 3. And it begins over at column A. So the cell at which my data model begins is A3.
Higher date C3. Start of new date. First name cropped right at B3. A3.
So A3, and it's telling me that it's cropped and that it's overlapping with adjacent cells, and we will fix that in the future. For right now, let's just focus on modeling our data set. So each column, from left to right.
Sheet 1. First name cropped right at B3. A3.
First name here at A3.
Last name cropped right at C3. B3.
B3 is last name.
Higher date C3.
And higher date is C3. That means below each one of these headers or column headers, we're going to have that relevant information. So we will not have first names on the C column because that goes completely against my column headers and how I built my data set. In order to stay true to my data set and not confuse people, we need to put what our column headers tell us to put under each column. So I'm going to go to the far left with Control left arrow.
First name, crop right at B3.
First name. Now I'm going to go down once.
Land A4.
And the first name, the first employee is going to be myself. And I mean, you can model your data even more. How do you want to enter your employees? Are you going to enter them in alphabetical order? Are you going to put in people who begin with the first letter A first or last letter A? Or does it even matter? In reality, it doesn't even matter all that much because you can sort by you can sort from A to Z using sort, or you can filter names using filters. You can filter certain names out. So your raw data, well, it does need to be modeled properly. You don't need to be very specific with how exactly the order of data, with the order of data that you enter. So I'm going to go ahead and just enter the names out of order. I'm going to go ahead and put Eric for the first name here in cell
The cell being edited as A4 and book 1 colon.
A4, which is right below my column header.
Land B4.
In B4, I'm going to put my last name, Cifuentes.
S. Land C4.
And my hire date was way back in July 31st of 2019. So I'm going to go ahead and put in for the July, I'm going to put 07
Slash
31.
slash 2Z19.
No, right arrow, or no, we'll do Control Enter to save it.
Control Enter 7/31/2019. Overlaps right.
All right. So here we have a date, and the Excel knows it's a date, so it's modeled it or it's formatted it to look like a date as well. And that's another thing. We'll talk about data types again later on. So we've got our first employee row or our first employee record, Eric Cifuentes. We'll enter a second one, and we'll enter Aaron. So we'll go back here to the first column, column A.
A4.
A4 is
First Eric A4.
Eric. We'll go down one cell in the same column.
Land A5.
So here in A5, which is the column that contains first names, we'll put Aaron.
A-A-R-O-N.
One column to the right, column B, cell B5,
Land B5.
we'll put Hoffman.
H-O-F-F-A-N. Land C5.
And for his hire date, we'll just make up a one. We'll say January 1st of 2019.
9102-2Z19.
Now, we've got here
Control Enter 1
a tiny little data set, a very small data set.
Eric first name.
So let's go to the very top.
Eric first name. Crop right at B.
So here we are at the top of the data set, top left. We've built a small little rectangular data set. Actually, this is a, yeah, it's a actually it's a square. This is not a geometry lesson. So we're at the top of a data set here, the top leftmost corner of the data set. And from top to left, from left to right, we have 3 cells at the top. We have our column headers. Actually, let's go here to the top. So the way we've built our data set, the first row, row 1, column A, cell A1 has
Sheet 1, employee roster overlaps right.
our title. This is what our workbook's called. When people look at this worksheet, is what our worksheet's called. When people look at this worksheet, they're going to know that this is a worksheet containing an employee roster. And then we have a blank row to give separation, and this establishes a data region. Each range is going to be separate. Each range is separated by a blank row or column. We're going to go down once more here on column A to row 3.
First name, crop right at B3, A3.
A3. So the top leftmost corner of our range or of our model is A3, and that is the first name. To the right, last name,
hire date C3,
and hire date. 3 across, and
Eric A4, Aaron A5,
3 down.
Hoffman 1/1/2019 C5.
So this model is arranged in the way where the topmost row, row 3, is my column headers, and the far leftmost column, column A, is my row headers. Row headers are just the same as column headers. Columns tell us what exactly the columns will contain, and our row headers will tell us what our rows contain. Well, I guess in this case, we don't have row headers because the first The leftmost column has our first name. But in this case, you could say that the first names are the row headers. But for example, when you're building a sales sheet, our row headers would be the name of the product we're working with, where our column headers would be the month. So for example, we would have January Coke sales. So January would be the column header and Coke would be the row header. We're talking about Coke, the product, and this cell is talking about the sales of Coke in January, just January. So that's sort of how we've built it. And in this employee roster, we have 3 cells across. We have first name, last name, hire date, and then we've got 2 rows below that containing 2 employees. So from A3
Hoffman, Eric, first name, copyright at B3, A3.
All the way to the bottom right, so we're gonna go down
Eric, A4, Aaron, A5.
A5, and then to the right,
Hoffman, B5, 1/1/2019, C5.
C5. That is the end of our range. Ranges are a set of data that begins at the top left and ends at the bottom right, which means that this set beginning at A3 and ending at C5 is 3 cells across and 3 cells down. Or using basic arithmetic, it's 3 by 3 or 9 cells. There are 9 cells in this one range. There are 9, that's how we built it. Each record is 1 row, and each column is a particular piece of information tied to that record. I hope that that makes things simple. I hope that explanation helps. And finally, the reason we have that row between the title and the headers, the column headers, is to establish or to distinguish separation between ranges. For example, I'm going to go to the top with Control Home.
First cell, employee roster, overlaps right new.
Employee roster. There are technically 10 cells that have information in this worksheet. However, we only have the range. We have 2 ranges in this worksheet. There are 10 cells, but there are 2 ranges. One range has 9 cells. The other range, where I am, A1, has 1 cell. So if I were to move down, there's a blank row. To separate a range in how Excel views ranges, you need a blank row or blank column between sets of data. If you did not have this row right here, row 2, had information, Excel would see it as a part of the same range as
first name, copyright B3, A3.
This range, A3 here. So that's why I like to set my title up top to tell people what they're working with, what the sheet's about, or what instructions to follow when using this sheet. And then you move down here to 1 column down, 1 blank row. You stick 1 blank row between or 1 blank column, and now you've known that you have entered a new range. So you can navigate. To refresh navigation, you can navigate from column to column with the left and right arrows,
Land B1, land C1.
like so, which navigates you from row to row. I mean, from column to column. It navigates you from column to column across a row. And you can navigate down a column with the up and down arrows. This makes you go from row to row.
Land C2, hire date C3.
Each column is predicated with a letter, A, B, C, from left to right. Each row has a number to identify it, 1, 2, 3, going top to bottom. Cell, for example, C3 is 3 columns to the right and 3 cells down. So it is on the 3rd column and 3rd row. Very good. Now let's navigate by range. So when you have that empty blank row or blank column, you can use Control plus an arrow key to move about. So here from cell A1, I can press down arrow twice to move to the beginning of my range at A3. But I purposefully left a blank row in between here to be able to navigate more efficiently or quickly. If I press Control down arrow, Excel viewing a range below here is going to move me directly to that range. So from A1, I predict that Control down arrow is going to take me to A3.
First name, crop right at B3, A3, start of new.
A3. So it completely skipped row 2 because there is nothing there at that cell, A2. And it took me to A3. And if I were to hit Control down arrow once more, it would take me to the end of this data set or this range. Or it would take me to the end of the column. So
Aaron, A5.
A5, that is correct, because this data range ends at A, or it ends at row 5. If I were to hit Control down arrow again, it's going to take me to the end of the workbook because there is no more data between row 5 and row 1,500,000 whatever.
Land, A 1,048,000.
1,048,000.
Aaron, A5.
So Control up arrow to get back to the last row or the last row of information that has information. Similarly, if I do Control right arrow,
1/1/2019, C5.
it's going to take me to column C because that's the last column in this data set that has information. Control right arrow
Land, XFD.
is going to take me to the end. Now, let's say I had information. Let's say I had data at C5 and at F5. If I hit
1/
Control right arrow from here,
press Control plus Shift plus D to is not available.
I pressed the wrong
Escape.
keystroke. My
Add
apologies.
dot button to act. Dictionary.
I opened
Escape.
a.
Delete button. Alt F4. Please
There we
wait.
go. I opened the dialog box. Now I'm going to use Insert C to know where I am, which cell I'm at.
C5.
C5. Okay, I'm at the end of this range. If I were to press Control right arrow from C5 and I had a piece of data at F5, which is a 1, 2, D, E, which is 3 columns to the right, I would move from C5 to F5 because that's the next cell with data to the right. So
Land E5. Land F5.
let's go ahead and just put something in here. Data.
DA.
All right.
Land G data F5. F5.
Now the cell F5 has the word data. So left arrow back to
Land E5. Land
C5.
1/1/2019, C5.
And now I'll do Control right arrow and see if it takes me to the end of the workbook or the end of the row.
Data F5. Start of new.
F5. And if I Control right arrow again, because there is nothing to the right of F5 on this row, it's going to take me to the end.
Land XFD5.
Control left from here will take me to F5 because that from all the way to the end, that is the only cell with data from XFD all the way back to F5. Control left arrow will take me to C5 because that's the next cell over to the left with data. And Control left arrow again is going to take me back to the beginning
Aaron A5.
of the row. So Control up, Control down, Control left, and Control right are going to move you between data ranges, and it's going to move you between the beginning and end of a range. So first it'll move you to the end of the range, and then it will move you to the beginning of the next range, regardless of which direction you're moving. I hope that makes sense. I don't want to go far into the weeds today because it's already been a lot of information that we've covered. Let's see here. I believe that would be a good place for us to conclude today. We'll call it a little bit short. Just understand the basic data components of a workbook. Workbook is the biggest component of data. A workbook is comprised of various worksheets. A worksheet is comprised of various rows and columns going left to right and up and down. Each column and row is comprised of tiny little blocks called cells. The cell being the smallest unit of data in a worksheet or workbook is a simple intersection of a row and column. Regardless of what cell you're always at an intersection of a row and a column. This intersection is called a cell address. The address has both a letter and a number, the letter designating a column while the number designates a row. When you move left and right across a row, you're moving across the letters or across columns A, B, C, with A being the leftmost column. When you move up and down a column, you're moving by row or by numbers 1, 2, 3, with 1 being the topmost number or the topmost row. Before you model your data, but before you enter data, you want to model what it's supposed to look like. Don't just visualize it, write it down. Understand what you want it to look like and what goes where. For example, in your employee roster, you want to the far left to have the first name of the employee, followed by the last name, or a middle name, followed by the last name. And then a date of hire. Finally,
Alert from
you
test
want
manager,
a
you can
social
find more
security
webinars on our
number.
website,
So always understand what you want your data model to look like before you enter data. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back in there and you're going to have to drag this here or copy this there or enter functions to transpose information somewhere else. And that's just a bother. So always understand how you want something to look before you build it. Usually records signify rows signify one record. That is usually how it works, while columns signify one piece of information in a record. All right. Before I end it, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, here live tonight. And to anyone listening to us in the future, thank you so much for checking us out and for giving us a listen. I hope that these educational webinars are helpful in any capacity. If you have suggestions for future presentations, questions, or comments, email myself, eric.cifuentes, eric.sifuentes at austinlighthouse.org, AustinLighthous.org, or Aaron Hoffman, AARON.HOFFMAN at austinlighthouse.org. Or if you are interested in classes or just wish to speak to us with your voice box, call us at 512-647-4625. That's 512-647-4625. We're available from 7 a.m. 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. are our working hours, Monday through Friday. You can email us and we will definitely respond back to you. And Aaron has posted our email addresses, and you can find our webinars on the Austin Lighthouse website. You can find our presentations there. Thank you so much for joining us. Also thank you to Dr. Laura Miller from Northwest Eye Care. How could I possibly forget about Miss Dr. Laura Miller? She has been with us for, man, it's like part one, I believe. It's been a while. Thank you so much for Northwest Eye Care, for Miss Miller, for sending her patients, for recommending them to listen to us. It means quite a bit. And I believe that is a good wrap up. Aaron, are there any questions from any of our viewers?
Nope, we have none right now. If you'd like to ask a question, you can get in. Last call.
Last call for anyone asking questions. Going once, going twice, going 3 times, and that's a wrap. Thank you so much to everyone. If you have your questions, email us or call us. We will be here. Leave a voicemail, leave an email. We will see you in 2 weeks, where we will dive deeper into Excel and get into some data entry for real. Take care, everybody.
Have a good night.
Alt F4. Save. Escape. Meeting control.